Good morning. I think it is really amazing to reflect on the fact that it's less than 4 years since the OAK outcome measures were first launched. So they were launched in the very tail end of 2013, and it feels like there's been a huge amount of interest and progress in actually a really short space of time. And I wanted to ask in the room here, who has been involved? Sam, you said St Luke's has been involved for quite a number of years now, but who else has been involved? You know, who's an OAK veteran? Who's been involved for 3 or 4 years in OAK? If people could maybe put their hands up. Right up, yeah. And what about sort of intermediate OAKers? 2 years or so? Quite a lot. Any OAK novices? People who've been introducing OAK just in the past year or so? And any OAK virgins in the room? A couple. So Hospice UK first became involved just a few months after OAK was launched, so in very early 2014. And I think that this work on OAK and the outcome measures is possibly the most important and most impactful piece of work that I've been involved in and will be involved in at Hospice UK. I think the significance is huge. The timing of the launch of the measures really couldn't have been more perfect from Hospice UK's point of view, because it was really just very, very shortly after the final report of the Commission into the Future of Hospice Care, which talked about the need for the sector to really become more outward-looking and to be able to tell much more clearly a compelling story about the work that we do and the difference we make, and identified the need to rectify the frequently appalling lack of systematic measurement of performance, analysis of data, and use of evidence in decision making. So it was a real kind of wake-up call. It was holding up a mirror to the sector and saying something needs to change. We are doing good things, we're doing important things, we're doing very valuable things, but actually we need to move on from a world where thank you cards, chocolate boxes, hugs from grateful patients and families, and flowers were what we took as the evidence that we were doing good things. That's not an evidence base. And I think the combination of the Commission report and its messages and the sudden availability of a coherent suite of robust, validated outcome measures for palliative care was a real game changer. And it's worth reminding ourselves why this is so important, because before then, what we had, I've likened it before to a wildflower meadow. It was kind of anything goes, it was Wild West. I remember seeing a presentation from Fliss where she talked about some research that found there were 116 different outcome measures being used in the palliative care sector, but of those, 99 were being used by fewer than 10 providers. It's a completely fragmented world. Whereas here, what we had was suddenly the opportunity to use measures not just in terms of looking at what they could do for individual patients, but I think the game-changing aspect here was the power of aggregation, to look at populations, to be able to look across different services, and to be able, because we had consistent and robust and validated measures, to suddenly be able to think in terms of how they can help us at individual patient level, at service level, and at sector-wide and national level as well. How can we now take these things which are objective, quantifiable, measurable, and really learn together collectively what they're telling us about which are the best interventions, which are the kind of approaches that are having the most impact, how can we use them to foster a culture of improvement and drive change throughout the system. And we've done a huge amount since then. So since those early days when we started partnering, Hospice UK and Cicely Saunders Institute started partnering on this, we have launched the Palliative Care Outcome Measures Resource Pack. We have run 10 Train the Trainer sessions, which over 200 people have taken part in. We have run a series of webinars, but we know that there's huge amounts more to do. It's really heartening for me now that I see this feeding through in things like the abstracts that we get through for our annual conference. OAK and outcome measures are increasingly part of that narrative and part of what people are talking about. When I visit hospices and see posters on the wall about outcome measures when I came to the MDT meeting at St Luke's over a year ago. So just seeing how it's starting to feed in and become, it's not fully embedded yet, but the process is well underway. But I know it can feel a bit like this. I know it's tough. It can feel like it's a real struggle to get colleagues to understand what it's all about. It can feel for staff like it's just yet another admin burden that needs to be added on top of all the massively existing heavy workloads, demands, forms to be filled in, data to be collected. So we know it's not easy. And I think there's just two key things I want to highlight in this overview. One is reminding ourselves of the importance of Oak at both strategic and clinical level. And secondly, that we can't do this alone. We have to work together to make this happen. Today's conference is all about implementing outcome measures in clinical practice. And, quite rightly, the whole rest of the day is going to be focused on that. But just as part of taking this step back and giving the overview and perspective at the morning, I just want to frame it in terms of reminding ourselves that what is so powerful about these measures is that not only do they help us think about and adjust and improve the care for each individual person, but they also have this massive strategic impact. And even though we're not there yet, and even though we've got a good mix in the room of people, the stages that people are at in terms of implementation, I think it's really important, if you're not doing this stuff now, to have it in mind and be aware that this needs to be the drive that we're working towards. So are people using the findings from outcome measures in the way that you report to your Board of Trustees? Is it included in some way summarised in the data dashboards? Is there a trustee champion who's really getting under the skin of and understanding the outcome measures in a bit more detail than the rest of the board so they can be a champion? Are your own staff really on board and understanding? And are we working hard enough to make sure that we treat our staff as stakeholders in this and help them understand the value and the potential? Is what you're saying and finding about outcomes feeding through into what gets reported in quality accounts? Is it feeding through into the conversations you have when CQC inspectors come to visit? And not just one or two people who might happen to be on shift or working that day, but is it something that whole teams can talk about? Are the findings from the outcome measures feeding into some of the messages that we give to funders and donors? So we're really showing, yes, we are on the case, we're on the ball, we're looking at how we can drive quality improvement, how we can improve outcomes for patients. It's not just saying it. What are we actually doing to demonstrate that we're looking seriously and taking the data that we collect and analysing it and using it to improve outcomes for patients? And can we tell that story? Can we share that narrative with funders and donors and commissioners? And again, I realise it's tricky. I think it's a real balancing act about what to say when, how to do it without raising expectations so high, particularly with people who don't come from a palliative care world and might think that this is something that if we talk about it 1 month, in 6 months' time it will be embedded, and the next year we should be able to report on it. And we all know that it's more difficult and more clumsy and more clunky than that. But I think it's something we need to start introducing into that strategic thinking and conversations with key external partners and collaborators and stakeholders. So it's the direction we need to be going towards, even if it's a tricky balancing act and we're not always going to get it exactly right. So, of course, when you think about it in that way, none of us can do this alone. It is a tough mountain to climb. We're part way up the mountain together. And I just wanted to finish by telling you a little bit about some of the work that Hospice UK and FLIS, so with the Cicely Saunders Institute and now in FLIS's new role with the Wolfson Palliative Care Research Centre as well, that we are talking about and collaborating on to take forward the support that's available so that we can drive this agenda together. So last July we launched the new Oak Community of Practice, and we're planning to have some further events in 2018. We've got a forum set up on Hospice IQ, and if you'd like to get involved in that, join the Community of Practice, take part in the forum, look for it on Hospice IQ, and please contact me or my colleague Sarah Russell if you want to find out more. Hospice UK is planning to launch by the end of this year a monthly e-bulletin on research and outcomes, and Sarah will be the editor of that. We really want to work closely with FLIS and colleagues to play a role in actively disseminating the information as new tailored versions of IPOS come out. So heart failure, dementia, renal, there's various tailored versions that are in development. As different language translations become available, we really want to play an active part in sharing and disseminating their availability, letting people know about them, partly through this e-bulletin, but also through e-hospice articles, case study examples, the community of practice through our annual conference. So please also keep us informed and tell us about the ways in which you're starting to use the outcome measures, what you're learning from them, what changes you're making as a result, what difference it's making for your services as well as for your individual patients. Because we want to help amplify and share those stories, because I think that's going to be the best way that people will really learn from each other, look at what other places are doing, think, oh, we could do that, or we could adapt that, or we've done something really interesting here. We'd like to tell other people about it. So please be part of that. And we're seeking funding to see whether we can develop further additional resources, templates, e-learning resources. So those are things that we're hoping to find funding to be able to do. So if we can get this right, I think that there's massive opportunity. It's a real holy grail, I think, in palliative care, to be able to develop the case mix adjusted benchmarking, which I know FLIS is working so hard to try and get the funding and take forward, which will really enable different providers to share and compare and learn and improve together. Using the outcomes data to improve care both for individuals and for strategic decision making, for resource allocation, for staffing decisions, for educational decisions, to develop and test new models of care and evaluate them. If we can manage to do all this, and if we can confidently use this to demonstrate the value of what we do, the difference that we make as a sector, collectively, not just service by service, but really tell that as a compelling story, I think we'll have driven that agenda to the point where we've reached that holy grail, we've achieved that, and I think that's really a mountain worth climbing together. Thank you.